The bond between siblings is supposed to be sacred. Brothers and sisters fight, compete, and annoy each other. But underneath those surface conflicts lies a connection forged in childhood, strengthened by shared experiences and meant to last a lifetime. An older sister is supposed to protect her younger brother, to be his defender and guide. But what happens when that protector becomes a predator? When love turns to something dark and deadly? The 911 call came in at 3:42 p.m. on March 23, 2019, from a modest home in suburban Columbus, Ohio. The voice on the line belonged to a 15-year-old girl, and her words were delivered with an eerie calmness that would later chill everyone who heard the recording. "I need to report an accident," the voice said. "My little brother isn't breathing. I think he's dead." The dispatcher, following protocol, asked what had happened. The response came without hesitation, without emotion, without any of the panic or hysteria one would expect from a teenager who had just found her sibling dead. "We were playing a game. It went too far. I need you to send someone." When paramedics arrived at the Reynolds home on Maple Grove Drive, they found 7-year-old Ethan Reynolds in his bedroom, lying motionless on the floor. His 15-year-old sister, Madison Reynolds, stood in the hallway, her clothes disheveled, but her expression blank. The paramedics immediately began life-saving measures, but it was already too late. Ethan had been dead for at least an hour, maybe longer. What investigators would discover in the hours and days that followed would reveal a crime so calculated, so cold-blooded, and so utterly senseless that it would force everyone to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the monster doesn't break into your home. Sometimes it lives there, sharing your meals, sleeping down the hall, calling you mom and dad. 9 months later, Judge Robert Morrison looked down at the teenage girl standing before him in the courtroom. Madison Reynolds, now 16, stood with her head slightly bowed, her hands clasped in front of her, looking for all the world like a child who didn't belong in adult criminal court. Behind her, her parents sat broken and devastated, having lost both their children in one terrible day, one to death and one to the darkness that had consumed her. "Madison Reynolds," Judge Morrison began, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to pronounce, "you have been convicted of first-degree murder in the death of your 7-year-old brother, Ethan Reynolds. The evidence presented at trial showed premeditation, deliberation, and a level of cruelty that defies comprehension." He paused, and in that silence, everyone in the courtroom held their breath, waiting for the sentence that would seal Madison's fate. But before we understand the sentence, we need to understand the crime. We need to understand how a 15-year-old honor student from a good family became a killer. And most disturbing of all, we need to understand why. This is the story of Madison Reynolds and the day she murdered her little brother. The Reynolds family of Columbus, Ohio, appeared to be the embodiment of suburban success. David Reynolds, 43, was a senior accountant at a major firm downtown, providing a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle for his family. His wife, Jennifer Reynolds, 41, worked part-time as a dental hygienist while managing the household and their children's busy schedules. They lived in a well-maintained 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood known for excellent schools, low crime, and the kind of community involvement that made it regularly featured in Best Places to Live articles about Columbus. Madison Reynolds, born on June 8, 2003, had been their first child, a beautiful baby girl who met all her developmental milestones and seemed destined for success. She was an intelligent child who excelled academically, earning straight A's throughout elementary and middle school. She participated in the school orchestra,
playing violin with competence, if not passion. She had a small circle of friends and seemed well adjusted by all external measures. Teachers at her school described her as quiet and conscientious, a student who always completed her work on time and caused no behavioral problems. Ethan had arrived 7 years after Madison, an unexpected but welcome addition to the family. Born on January 15, 2012, he was a happy, energetic child who brought joy and chaos into the household in equal measure. While Madison had been a serious, intense child even in her early years, Ethan was all brightness and enthusiasm, the kind of kid who made friends effortlessly and approached life with infectious optimism. He idolized his older sister, following her around the house, wanting to be included in whatever she was doing, seeking her approval with the desperate devotion only a younger sibling can muster. The significant age gap between Madison and Ethan meant that their relationship had always been somewhat asymmetrical. Madison was not just a sister, but often functioned as a secondary caregiver, babysitting Ethan while their parents worked or ran errands. Jennifer Reynolds would later tell investigators that she had always trusted Madison completely with Ethan, that her daughter had seemed responsible and mature beyond her years, that she never imagined leaving them alone together could be dangerous. But underneath the surface of this seemingly normal family life, something dark was growing in Madison Reynolds. Exactly when it started and why would become subjects of extensive investigation and psychiatric evaluation. What was clear was that by the time Madison entered high school in the fall of 2017, she had begun to change in subtle ways that concerned those who knew her best, though no one recognized these changes as warning signs of impending violence. Madison's best friend since elementary school, Ashley Martinez, would later tell investigators that Madison had become more withdrawn and distant, starting around 8th grade. She was never super outgoing, she recalled, but she used to at least seem interested in stuff, you know? We'd talk about boys and movies and normal teenage things. But then she just kind of shut down. She'd sit with us at lunch, but wouldn't really participate in conversations. She'd stare off into space like she was somewhere else entirely. Teachers at Madison's high school noticed similar changes. Her grades remained excellent. She maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout freshman and sophomore year. But her classroom participation dropped dramatically. She stopped raising her hand, stopped engaging in discussions, and seemed to complete her work mechanically, going through the motions without any apparent intellectual curiosity or enthusiasm. Her sophomore year English teacher, Mrs. Patricia Chen, mentioned to the school counselor, Mr. James Patterson, that Madison's creative writing assignments had become darker and more disturbing, featuring themes of violence and death that seemed inappropriate for a 15-year-old from a stable background. One particular essay, written in January 2019, just 2 months before Ethan's murder, would later be entered into evidence at Madison's trial. The assignment had been to write a personal narrative about a significant childhood memory. While most students wrote about vacations, sporting events, or family celebrations, Madison had written a chilling piece about fantasizing about her younger brother disappearing, about imagining life in the house without his constant noise and demands for attention. The essay had ended with the line, "Sometimes I think about how peaceful the house would be if he just wasn't here anymore, if he just stopped existing." Mrs. Chen had found the essay troubling enough to forward it to the school counselor, Mr. James Patterson, who had called Madison in for a meeting. During that meeting, which Patterson documented in his notes, Madison had explained that the essay was fictional, that she was experimenting with dark themes for artistic purposes, and that she loved her brother, despite finding him annoying sometimes. Mr. Patterson, relieved by this explanation, and having no evidence of actual threat, had accepted her assurance and taken no further action. He would live with that decision for the rest of his life. Madison's relationship with Ethan, as observed by family members and neighbors, appeared normal on the surface, but had undertones of tension that became more apparent in retrospect. Madison fulfilled her babysitting responsibilities competently, keeping Ethan fed and safe when their parents were away. But she showed no warmth or affection toward him, treating him more like a task to be managed than a brother to be loved. When Ethan would excitedly show her a drawing he'd made, or tell her about something that happened at school, Madison would respond with monosyllabic acknowledgments, never engaging with his enthusiasm or showing interest in his child's world.
At home, the dynamic between Amanda and Nathan became increasingly problematic as Nathan grew from infant to toddler to young child. According to statements Roberto and Christina gave to police after Nathan's death, there had been numerous incidents over the years where Amanda had been too rough with Nathan, had accidentally knocked him over, or had taken toys away from him in ways that seemed deliberately cruel. Each time, her parents had addressed the behavior, issuing consequences ranging from timeouts to loss of privileges, and Amanda would apologize and promise to do better. "We thought it was normal sibling rivalry," Roberto said during his police interview, his voice hollow with grief and guilt. "Brothers and sisters fight. They push each other's buttons. We never imagined that Amanda actually hated Nathan. We never thought she was capable of really hurting him, let alone killing him. How could we think that about our own daughter?" Christina's perspective, shared through tears and visible anguish, revealed a mother who had sensed something was wrong but hadn't known how to address it, or hadn't wanted to face the implications of what she was seeing. "There were moments when I'd catch Amanda looking at Nathan with this expression on her face that I couldn't quite read," Christina testified. "It wasn't affection. It wasn't even neutral indifference. It was something cold, something almost hateful. But then she'd see me watching and her expression would change, and she'd smile and say something appropriate, and I'd tell myself I was imagining things." One particularly troubling incident occurred when Nathan was 4 years old and Amanda was 12. The family had gone to a local park for an afternoon outing, and while Roberto and Christina were distracted setting up a picnic lunch, Nathan had wandered toward the playground equipment. Amanda had been assigned to watch him, a responsibility she usually resented, but had accepted that day without complaint. Minutes later, Christina heard Nathan screaming and turned to see him dangling from the top of a tall jungle gym, his small hands struggling to maintain grip while Amanda stood below, watching. Christina had run over and managed to position herself to catch Nathan as his grip failed and he fell. The 4-year-old had been terrified but uninjured, and when Christina had demanded to know why Amanda hadn't helped Nathan or called for parents, the 12-year-old had shrugged and said she thought Nathan needed to learn to be more careful. The explanation had struck Christina as cold and insufficient, but when she discussed it with Roberto later, they had rationalized it as Amanda teaching Nathan a lesson about being more cautious, not recognizing it for what it might actually have been: a test run, a way of seeing what it felt like to watch her brother in danger. As Nathan grew into an energetic, affectionate little boy, the contrast between the siblings became even more stark. Nathan was outgoing and friendly, quick to laugh and eager to please. He adored his parents and, heartbreakingly, seemed to worship his big sister, despite her consistent rejection of his attempts at connection. Videos from family gatherings and holidays, later reviewed by investigators, showed Nathan constantly trying to engage Amanda, offering her toys, asking her to play with him, seeking her attention and approval. In nearly every video, Amanda can be seen ignoring him, moving away from him, or responding to his overtures with barely concealed annoyance. "Nathan loved Amanda so much," Roberto said during his victim impact statement at trial. "He would draw pictures for her, save his Halloween candy to share with her, ask her to read him bedtime stories. He couldn't understand why his big sister didn't want to be around him. He'd ask us, 'Why doesn't Manda like me?' And we'd tell him she did like him. She was just a teenager, and teenagers sometimes wanted their own space. We made excuses for her. We explained away her coldness. And Nathan kept trying to win her affection, right up until the day she killed him."
Amanda's teenage years saw a further deterioration in her relationship with her family, though from the outside she maintained a facade of normalcy. She performed adequately in school, earning mostly B's with occasional A's in subjects that interested her, particularly English and art. She had a small circle of friends, girls she'd sit with at lunch and occasionally hang out with on weekends, though these friendships appeared superficial rather than deep. She participated in her school's art club and took pride in her drawings, which her art teacher described as technically skilled but emotionally dark, featuring isolated figures and themes of abandonment and revenge. At home, Amanda had essentially created her own separate existence, spending most of her time in her bedroom with the door closed, emerging only for meals and school. She was polite but distant with her parents, answering their questions about school and activities but never volunteering information or initiating conversations. With Nathan, she maintained a cold detachment, speaking to him only when necessary and usually in a tone that made it clear she found his presence burdensome. Roberto and Christina, exhausted from work and the demands of parenting an energetic 7-year-old, had fallen into the trap of being grateful that Amanda didn't cause obvious problems. She didn't come home drunk or high, didn't sneak out at night, didn't get in trouble with the law, didn't fail classes. By the standards they used to measure teenage behavior, she seemed fine, just moody and withdrawn in ways they attributed to normal adolescent development. They didn't push her to be more engaged with the family, didn't insist on family therapy or individual counseling, didn't recognize the warning signs that were hiding in plain sight. The most significant warning sign, one that would not be discovered until after Nathan's death, was Amanda's journal. The black leather-bound notebook, kept hidden in a locked drawer in her desk, contained entries dating back 3 years, from when Amanda was 12 and Nathan was 4. The early entries were relatively benign expressions of teenage angst and resentment toward her parents for having another child. But as the entries progressed, they revealed an increasingly disturbing obsession with Nathan and a growing desire to see him gone. An entry from May 2018, when Amanda was 13, read, "He was crying again today because he fell off his bike. Mom and Dad dropped everything to comfort him, like they always do. I remember when I fell off my bike at that age, they told me to get up and stop being dramatic. Everything changed when he was born. They changed. I hate watching them love him more than they ever loved me." A November 2018 entry was more explicit. "Sometimes I imagine what life would be like if Nathan had never been born, or if he just disappeared somehow. Would Mom and Dad finally pay attention to me again? Would they remember they have a daughter who exists? Or would they just be sad and I'd still be invisible? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe I just want him gone for the sake of it." The most chilling entries came in the months immediately preceding Nathan's death. A January 2020 entry stated, "I've been researching accidents that happen to children. Drowning is actually pretty common. Kids drown in bathtubs all the time, even older kids who should know better. No one would think it was weird if Nathan drowned. He's clumsy and impulsive. It would make sense." This entry and several others like it would later be cited by prosecutors as clear evidence of premeditation, proof that Amanda had been planning her brother's death for months before carrying it out. The final entry, written on March 11, 2020, just 6 days before Nathan's death, contained words that would be read aloud in court and analyzed by experts. "I've decided. Spring break is next week. Mom and Dad will both be working Wednesday afternoon. It will just be me and Nathan. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I've planned every detail. After this, everything will be different. After this, I'll finally be the only one again."
March 17, 2020, began as an ordinary Wednesday during spring break for the Martinez children. Amanda, 15 years old, and Nathan, 7, were both home from school for the week-long break. Roberto had already left for work by 7 a.m., his usual departure time, and Christina was scheduled to work a half day at the dental office, planning to leave around 8:30 a.m. and return by early afternoon. The arrangement was one they'd used before. Amanda, considered responsible enough at 15 to watch her younger brother for a few hours, would babysit Nathan until Christina returned home. Christina had prepared lunch items before leaving for work, reminding Amanda that there were sandwiches in the refrigerator and snacks in the pantry. She'd given Nathan his morning medication for the mild ADHD he'd been diagnosed with the previous year, kissed both children goodbye, and reminded Amanda to call her cell phone if there were any problems. According to Christina's later testimony, Amanda had been perfectly pleasant that morning, assuring her mother that everything would be fine and that she'd make sure Nathan ate lunch and didn't spend all day watching television. She seemed completely normal, Christina told investigators during her initial interview. She wasn't acting strange or anxious. She didn't give me any reason to worry. If anything, she seemed almost cheerful, which should have been my first clue that something was wrong, because Amanda was never cheerful about babysitting Nathan. But I was running late for work, and I was grateful she wasn't arguing about it, so I left. I left my son alone with the person who was planning to kill him. Security camera footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera captured Christina's car leaving the driveway at 8:37 a.m. For the next several hours, Amanda and Nathan were alone in the house, with no witnesses to what was happening inside. Nathan's iPad, later analyzed by forensic specialists, showed that he had spent the late morning watching YouTube videos of video game walkthroughs, his usual entertainment choice. The last activity on the device was registered at 2:14 p.m., suggesting that whatever happened to Nathan occurred sometime after that. According to Amanda's eventual confession, which she provided to police with the same unsettling calmness that had characterized her 911 call, she had spent the morning in her room while Nathan entertained himself downstairs. Around lunchtime, she'd made him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which Nathan had eaten while watching his iPad in the living room. She described watching her brother eat, observing how happy he seemed, how completely unaware he was of what she had been planning for months. "He kept trying to show me funny videos on his iPad," Amanda told Detective Lisa Morrison during her interrogation. "He'd call me over and laugh at something and want me to laugh too. He was always doing that, trying to get me to be part of whatever he was doing. It was annoying. But I pretended to watch and smiled because I didn't want him to get upset before it happened. I wanted him to be happy, I guess, or at least not sad. That probably doesn't make sense." Around 2:30 p.m., Amanda told Nathan it was time for his bath. This was unusual, as Nathan typically bathed in the evening before bed. But according to Amanda's statement, she'd convinced him by saying their mother wanted him to get cleaned up because they'd be going out for dinner later. Nathan, trusting and eager to please, had agreed without question and followed his sister upstairs to the bathroom. Amanda ran the bath, filling the tub deeper than Nathan usually had it filled, a detail she would later describe in her confession with clinical precision. She had Nathan get undressed and climb into the tub, and for a few minutes, according to her account, she let him play with his bath toys, small plastic dinosaurs that were his current favorites. Nathan had been happy, splashing and making the dinosaurs fight each other, narrating elaborate battles in the squeaky voice he used for pretend play. What happened next would be reconstructed through Amanda's confession, physical evidence, and the medical examiner's findings. At approximately 2:45 p.m., Amanda had approached the bathtub, placed her hands on Nathan's shoulders, and pushed him underwater. The 7-year-old had struggled immediately, fighting against her sister's grip, his small hands grasping at her arms and the sides of the tub, his body thrashing as panic and the desperate need for air overwhelmed him. "He fought harder than I thought he would," Amanda told investigators, her voice matter-of-fact as she described drowning her brother. "I had to really push down to keep him under. He was scratching at my arms and trying to get up, but I was stronger. I kept thinking I just needed to hold him down for a little bit longer. It felt like it took forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then he stopped fighting. He just went still." The medical examiner would later determine that Nathan had survived for approximately 3 to 4 minutes after being submerged, struggling for air, inhaling water, experiencing the terror of drowning while his own sister held him down. Defensive wounds on Amanda's forearms, scratches from Nathan's fingernails as he fought desperately for his life, would corroborate her account of his struggle. The autopsy would conclude that cause of death was drowning, with no other injuries present except the defensive scratches, indicating that Amanda had used only the force necessary to keep Nathan submerged until he drowned. After Nathan stopped moving, Amanda had lifted his small body from the tub and laid him on the bathroom floor. She stared at him, according to her confession, for several long minutes, observing that his lips were turning blue and his chest was no longer moving. She checked for a pulse, finding none, confirming what she already knew: her little brother was dead. And her reaction to this confirmation, as she would later describe it, was not horror or remorse, but relief. I felt like I could finally breathe, like this weight I'd been carrying for 7 years had finally been lifted. I know that sounds terrible. I know I should have felt guilty or scared or sad, but I just felt free, like everything could finally go back to the way it was supposed to be. Amanda's actions following Nathan's death demonstrated a level of calculation that would prove crucial to the prosecution's case. Rather than immediately calling 911, she spent approximately 45 minutes staging the scene to appear like an accident. She redressed Nathan in his clothes, attempting to make it look like he had gone into the bathroom alone and somehow slipped and drowned. She cleaned up water that had splashed outside the tub during Nathan's struggle. She returned his iPad to the living room and positioned it as though he had been watching videos there before going upstairs. Only after completing these preparations did Amanda call 911 at 3:42 p.m., delivering the calm, emotionless report that her little brother wasn't breathing. The recording of that call would later be played in court, its content chilling in both what Amanda said and what she didn't say. Dispatcher: 911, what's your emergency? Amanda: my little brother isn't breathing. I think he's dead. Dispatcher: okay, I'm sending help right away. Where's your brother now? Amanda: he's in the upstairs bathroom, on the floor. Dispatcher: how old is your brother? Amanda: 7. Dispatcher: do you know what happened? Amanda: I think he drowned in the bathtub. I found him like this. Dispatcher: found him? Were you not with him? Amanda: no, I was in my room. He must have gone up there by himself.
This lie, told to the 911 dispatcher and later repeated to the first responders who arrived on scene, represented Amanda's initial attempt to portray Nathan's death as an accident she had discovered, rather than a murder she had committed. She maintained this story for approximately 3 hours after Nathan's death, through the arrival of paramedics who tried unsuccessfully to revive him, through the responding police officers who secured the scene, through her mother's hysterical arrival home to find her son dead. Cristina Martinez had received a call from a police officer while she was still at work, informing her that there had been an incident at home and she needed to return immediately. She arrived at 4:15 p.m. to find emergency vehicles filling her street, neighbors gathered on sidewalks in worried clusters, and police officers stationed at her front door. When she learned that Nathan was dead, her screams of grief could be heard throughout the neighborhood, a mother's anguish at the worst possible news. Roberto, contacted at his workplace and given the same vague information that there had been an incident at home, arrived shortly after Cristina. His reaction to Nathan's death, witnessed by multiple police officers, was one of complete shock and devastation. He collapsed when viewing Nathan's body, which remained in the upstairs bathroom awaiting the medical examiner's arrival, and had to be physically supported by officers as he was led away from the scene. Throughout the initial chaos of first responders, grieving parents, and the beginning of the investigation, Amanda maintained her facade of being a shocked,
traumatized sister who had discovered her brother's accidental drowning. She cried appropriately, accepted comfort from her mother, and answered initial questions from police officers in a manner that seemed consistent with a teenage girl dealing with terrible trauma. Detective Lisa Morrison, assigned to the case and present at the scene, would later testify that nothing about Amanda's initial behavior immediately raised red flags, though in retrospect, her emotional responses seemed more performed than genuine. She was saying all the right things and making all the right gestures, Morrison testified, but there was something slightly off that I couldn't quite identify at the time. Her tears seemed real enough, but her eyes were emotionless. She accepted hugs from her mother, but there was no real reciprocation. She was going through the motions of being upset, but it felt rehearsed rather than authentic. The first major crack in Amanda's story came when paramedics who had responded to the scene discussed their observations with Detective Morrison. They noted that Nathan's body had been found lying on the bathroom floor, fully clothed, with no water pooled around him. The bathtub itself was drained, with only residual water remaining. The bath toys Nathan allegedly had been playing with were neatly arranged on the tub's edge, rather than scattered, as would be expected if a child had been playing with them during a drowning accident. It didn't look like a drowning scene, paramedic James Chen told investigators. Usually with bathtub drownings, especially with children, there's water everywhere from the struggle. The tub is still full. The victim is found in wet clothes or undressed. This looked staged, like someone was trying to make it appear to be something it wasn't. These observations prompted Detective Morrison to request a more thorough investigation before officially classifying Nathan's death as an accidental drowning. The bathroom was processed as a potential crime scene, with forensic technicians photographing every detail, collecting samples, and looking for evidence that might tell the true story of what happened. Amanda was separated from her parents and asked to provide a more detailed account of her afternoon, specifically the timeline of events leading to her discovery of Nathan's body. Under gentle but persistent questioning from Detective Morrison, Amanda's story began to show inconsistencies. She claimed she had been in her room with headphones on, listening to music, and hadn't heard Nathan go upstairs or run the bath. But when asked what music she'd been listening to, she couldn't name any specific songs or artists. She said she'd found Nathan around 3:30 p.m., but when pressed about why she waited 12 minutes to call 911, she had no good explanation. She stated Nathan often took baths by himself during the day, but Christina would later confirm this was completely false. Nathan never bathed alone, and never during the afternoon. The breakthrough came when forensic examination of Amanda's forearms revealed the scratches she had sustained during Nathan's struggle. When Detective Morrison asked about these marks during a more formal interview that evening at the police station with both parents present, Amanda's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. She stared at the scratches for a long moment, seemed to realize that they contradicted her story of not being present during Nathan's drowning, and made a decision that would seal her fate. "I did it," Amanda said quietly, her words stunning her parents into silence. "I drowned him. I held him under the water until he stopped moving. It wasn't an accident. I meant to do it." Christina's wail of anguish at this confession was, according to everyone present, one of the most heartbreaking sounds they had ever heard. Roberto sat frozen, unable to process what he had just heard his daughter admit. And Amanda, having confessed to murdering her 7-year-old brother, showed no tears, no visible remorse, just a strange calm that suggested relief at no longer having to maintain her deception. The confession that followed, given over the next 3 hours with a public defender present as required for a juvenile suspect, provided the details of what happened in that bathroom, of months of planning, of the journal entries documenting Amanda's desire to be rid of her brother. She was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, premeditated and with special circumstances due to the victim being a child under 10 years old. Despite being only 15, the severity of the crime and the clear evidence of planning meant she would be tried as an adult,
facing the possibility of life in prison. The trial of Amanda Martinez began on September 14, 2020, 6 months after she had drowned her 7-year-old brother in their family bathtub. The case had garnered significant media attention, both locally in Riverside and nationally, as the public struggled to understand how a 15-year-old girl could deliberately murder her own sibling. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, concerned community members, and the shattered extended Martinez family, divided in their feelings between horror at what Amanda had done and grief for a troubled girl whose mental state had clearly been severely disturbed. Judge Victoria Chen, a respected jurist with 25 years on the bench, presided over the trial with the gravity it demanded. She had ruled in pre-trial hearings that Amanda would be tried as an adult due to the premeditated nature of the crime and the age of the victim. But she had also ordered extensive psychological evaluations to determine Amanda's mental state, both at the time of the killing and during the trial proceedings. Judge Chen made clear that while justice for Nathan required serious consequences, the court would also carefully consider Amanda's youth and psychological condition.
Amanda Martinez is a deeply troubled young woman who has failed by every system that should have helped her, Goldman argued in her opening statement. She struggled with severe depression, emerging personality disorders, and pathological jealousy that should have been identified and treated years before this tragedy occurred. What happened to Nathan is horrific and inexcusable, but understanding why it happened requires us to recognize that Amanda was not a cold-blooded killer, but rather a mentally ill child who acted on impulses she was not equipped to control. The trial lasted 3 weeks and featured testimony from forensic experts, psychologists, the medical examiner, investigating officers, and, heartbreakingly, from Roberto and Cristina Martinez, who had to relive the worst day of their lives while sitting in a courtroom with the daughter who had caused their pain. The prosecution's case was straightforward and powerful, with Amanda's own confession and journal providing overwhelming evidence of premeditation and intent. Perhaps the most damaging evidence was Amanda's journal, read aloud in portions by Prosecutor Torres in a courtroom that fell completely silent as the jury heard Amanda's own words expressing her desire for Nathan's death. The January 2020 entry about researching drowning accidents was particularly damning, as it directly connected Amanda's thoughts to her eventual method of killing. The final entry, written just 6 days before the murder, and explicitly stating, "I've decided," and "I know exactly what I'm going to do," left no doubt that this was a planned, deliberate act. The medical examiner's testimony about Nathan's cause of death and his suffering during the drowning was emotionally devastating for everyone in the courtroom. Dr. Robert Martinez, no relation to the family, explained that drowning is not a quick or painless death, that Nathan would have been conscious and terrified for most of the 3 to 4 minutes he was submerged, that his small body would have fought desperately for air until his lungs filled with water and his brain was deprived of oxygen. Several jurors were seen wiping tears as Dr. Martinez described Nathan's final moments. The defense focused their case primarily on psychological testimony, attempting to explain Amanda's mental state and capacity for judgment. Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychologist who had evaluated Amanda extensively, testified that Amanda met diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder and showed significant traits of emerging borderline personality disorder, including emotional instability, difficulty with interpersonal relationships, and impaired impulse control. Amanda Martinez was not operating with the same cognitive and emotional capacities as a typical 15-year-old child. Her ability to understand the full consequences of her actions was severely impaired by her mental illness. While she understood intellectually that killing Nathan was wrong, I don't believe she could fully grasp the permanence of death or the magnitude of the pain she would cause. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Williams was forced to acknowledge that Amanda's planning,
her research, and her attempts to stage the scene as an accident all demonstrated high-level cognitive functioning that seemed inconsistent with claims of impaired judgment. Prosecutor Torres pressed this point relentlessly, getting Dr. Williams to admit that Amanda clearly understood right from wrong, knew her actions were illegal, and took steps to avoid being caught. All evidence of the kind of knowing, deliberate conduct that defines first-degree murder. The most anticipated and controversial decision of the trial was whether Amanda would testify in her own defense. After extensive deliberation, defense attorney Goldman decided that putting Amanda on the stand was too risky, given her lack of remorse and her tendency to describe Nathan's death in clinical, emotionless terms that would likely alienate the jury. Instead, the jury heard Amanda's voice only through the recorded 911 call and her police interrogation, both of which reinforced the prosecution's portrayal of her as cold and calculating. Closing arguments brought the competing narratives into sharp focus. Prosecutor Torres emphasized Amanda's premeditation, her months of planning, her deliberate choice of method, and her complete lack of remorse. Amanda Martinez is not a victim, Torres argued passionately. Nathan is the victim, a 7-year-old boy who trusted his sister, who loved his sister despite her coldness toward him, who died terrified and in pain while Amanda held him underwater. That is not mental illness. That is evil, pure and simple. Defense attorney Goldman countered by emphasizing Amanda's youth and mental illness, arguing that a 15-year-old with severe psychological disorders should not be judged by the same standards as an adult. Amanda needs treatment, not life in prison. She needs intensive psychiatric intervention that might allow her to eventually understand the magnitude of what she did and become a functioning member of society. Condemning a mentally ill child to die in prison serves no purpose except vengeance. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances. The special circumstances finding, based on Nathan being under the age of 10 at the time of his death, meant that Amanda faced a mandatory sentence of either life without parole or life with parole after a minimum of 25 years. The decision of which sentence to impose fell to Judge Victoria Chen, who scheduled a sentencing hearing for 2 months later to allow for additional psychological evaluations and victim impact statements. The sentencing hearing held on December 3, 2020.
The sentencing hearing brought the Martinez family back to the courthouse for what they knew would be a defining moment in all their lives. The courtroom was once again filled to capacity, with additional security present due to the emotional intensity expected during the proceedings. Amanda, now 16 years old, entered wearing the same type of conservative outfit her defense team had selected for trial, designed to make her appear young and sympathetic. Her expression, as it had been throughout the trial, remained largely impassive, showing none of the emotion that would have been expected from a teenager about to learn if she would ever again taste freedom. The pre-sentencing reports painted a complex picture of Amanda's time in juvenile detention since her arrest 9 months earlier. She had been a model inmate, causing no behavioral problems, attending required educational classes, and participating in mandatory counseling sessions. However, the psychological evaluations included in these reports indicated minimal progress in Amanda developing genuine empathy or understanding of the impact of her actions. Her counselors reported that she could articulate intellectually that what she did was wrong, but she seemed unable to access genuine emotional remorse or connection to Nathan as a real person whose life she had stolen. Amanda talks about Nathan's death as if it's something that happened to someone else, or something she observed rather than caused, wrote Dr. Jennifer Morrison, the clinical psychologist assigned to Amanda's case at the detention facility. She can describe the events accurately and can acknowledge that her actions caused pain to her family, but there's a disconnect between intellectual understanding and emotional reality. It's as if the empathy circuits in her brain simply don't function properly. Before Judge Chen announced her sentencing decision, she allowed victim impact statements from family members. Cristina Martinez approached the podium first, her physical appearance transformed by grief. The woman who had been vibrant and engaged 9 months earlier now looked decades older, her face drawn with sleepless nights and endless tears, her eyes hollow with loss that would never fully heal. "Nathan was the light of our lives," Cristina began, her voice breaking immediately. "He was sweet and funny and full of joy. He loved dinosaurs and video games and macaroni and cheese. He was learning to ride a bike without training wheels. He had just lost his first tooth and was excited about the tooth fairy. He had his whole life ahead of him, and Amanda took it all away." Cristina's statement became more direct as she turned to address her daughter, sitting at the defense table just feet away. "Amanda, you are my daughter, and some part of me will always love you because you came from my body. But I will never forgive you for what you did to Nathan. You watched him suffer. You held him under that water while he fought and struggled and was terrified. Your own brother, a little boy who loved you and wanted nothing more than for you to love him back. And you showed him no mercy." The courtroom sat in heavy silence as Cristina continued, her voice gaining strength through her pain. "People keep telling me you're sick, that you need help, that you didn't understand what you were doing. But I know you, Amanda. I raised you for 15 years. You're smart. You planned this. You knew exactly what you were doing when you drowned my baby boy. And you felt nothing afterward except relief. That's not mental illness. That's something broken inside you that can never be fixed." Roberto Martinez spoke next, his statement shorter but equally powerful. "I brought Amanda into our home when she was born. I changed her diapers, I taught her to ride a bike, I supported her in every way a father should. And when Nathan was born, I tried to make sure Amanda still felt loved and included. But nothing was ever enough for her. She wanted to be an only child so badly that she was willing to kill to make it happen. I don't know my daughter anymore. I don't know if I ever really knew her." The defense presented their own witnesses during the sentencing phase, primarily focusing on Amanda's potential for rehabilitation and the scientific evidence about adolescent brain development. Dr. Patricia Williams returned to testify about the ongoing development of the teenage brain and the possibility that with intensive treatment, Amanda might eventually develop the capacity for empathy and moral reasoning that she currently lacked. The adolescent brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex responsible for judgment and impulse control, continues developing into the mid-20s. Amanda is only 16 years old. With proper psychiatric intervention over years, not months, there is scientific basis to believe her brain could develop in ways that would allow her to eventually understand the full weight of what she did. Sentencing her to life without parole removes any possibility of discovering whether treatment could help her become someone different. Prosecutor Torres countered by arguing that some crimes are so heinous that youth and mental illness cannot serve as complete excuses. "Your Honor," he stated during his sentencing argument, "the defense wants you to focus on Amanda's potential for change, but we must also consider Nathan, who will never have the opportunity to change, to grow, to become anything. We must consider the deliberate, planned nature of this crime. And we must consider that Amanda has shown no genuine remorse, no horror at what she did, no recognition that she took a beautiful child's life for no reason other than her own selfishness." After all testimony and arguments were completed, Judge Victoria Chen announced she would take a 30-minute recess to finalize her decision. The courtroom buzzed with anxious speculation during the wait, with legal observers debating whether the judge would show leniency based on Amanda's age or impose the harshest possible sentence given the deliberate nature of the crime and Amanda's lack of remorse. When court reconvened, Judge Chen began by acknowledging the unprecedented difficulty of the decision she was about to make. "This court has presided over many difficult cases during my time on the bench,
but few have presented the moral and legal complexities of this one. On one hand, we have a 15-year-old girl who committed a terrible crime, showing premeditation and a level of planning that suggests adult-like capacity. On the other, we have scientific evidence that adolescent brains are fundamentally different from adult brains in ways that affect judgment and impulse control. The judge reviewed the specific factors she had considered: Amanda's age at the time of the crime, the premeditation evidenced by her journal and research, the vulnerability of the victim, Amanda's lack of remorse, the psychological evaluations indicating severe mental health issues, and the testimony about potential for rehabilitation. She acknowledged the pain of Nathan's family and their desire for justice, while also noting the defense's arguments about adolescent brain development and the possibility of change.
The question before this court, Judge Chen continued, is not whether Amanda Martinez committed first-degree murder. That has been established beyond any doubt. The question is what sentence serves both justice and society's interests. Does a 16-year-old, regardless of her crime, deserve the possibility of eventual redemption? Or are some acts so unforgivable that age becomes irrelevant? The courtroom was absolutely silent, every person present understanding that the next words from the judge's mouth would determine Amanda's fate. Cristina Martinez gripped her husband's hand tightly. Roberto stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Amanda herself sat motionless at the defense table, her expression unreadable. "Amanda Martinez," Judge Chen said, looking directly at the teenager, "I have considered all the evidence presented, all the arguments made, and all the relevant law. I have thought deeply about what justice means in a case like this, where the perpetrator is so young but the crime is so calculated. And I have concluded that there are some crimes that are simply too heinous to allow for the possibility of the perpetrator ever walking free, regardless of their age when the crime was committed." The judge's next words would echo through the courtroom and through media coverage across the country. "You took your 7-year-old brother's life in the most deliberate and cruel way imaginable. You planned his death for months. You waited for the perfect opportunity. You held him underwater while he struggled and fought for his life. And afterward, you showed no remorse, no horror at what you had done, only relief that he was gone. Your journal entries make clear that this was not an impulsive act, but a calculated decision to eliminate the brother you resented." Judge Chen's voice grew firmer as she continued. "The defense argues that you deserve a chance at rehabilitation because you are young and your brain is still developing. But I cannot, in good conscience, tell Nathan's family that the girl who deliberately drowned their son might someday walk free. I cannot tell this community that someone who planned and executed the murder of a child with such cold calculation deserves another chance at life when her victim will never have any chances at all." The judge paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the courtroom before delivering the sentence. "Amanda Martinez, for the crime of first-degree murder with special circumstances, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will die in prison, Amanda. You will never again walk free. You will never have a career, a family, or a normal life. All of that has been taken from you because you chose to take everything from Nathan." The courtroom erupted in mixed reactions. Cristina Martinez collapsed against her husband, sobbing. Whether from relief, grief, or some combination of both, it was impossible to tell. Several of Nathan's relatives called out their approval of the sentence. Defense attorney Goldman immediately stated her intention to appeal.
And Amanda Martinez, hearing that she would spend the rest of her life behind bars, showed the first genuine emotion many observers had seen from her. Her eyes widened slightly, her face paled, and for a brief moment something that might have been fear flickered across her features before she regained her composure. Judge Chen was not finished. "I want to address you directly, Amanda," she said, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its gravity. "You are 16 years old. You have decades of life ahead of you, but you will spend all of them in prison. I hope that over those years, with treatment and maturation, you will eventually develop the capacity to understand the magnitude of what you did. I hope you will someday feel genuine remorse for taking your brother's life, and I hope you will use whatever time you have on this earth to reflect on the fact that Nathan will never have any opportunities you squandered by committing this crime." The judge concluded the hearing with words directed at Nathan's family. "To Cristina Martinez and to Roberto Martinez and to all of Nathan's loved ones, I know that no sentence can bring Nathan back or ease your pain. I can only hope that knowing Amanda will never be free provides some measure of justice, even as I recognize that it provides no real comfort. This court is adjourned." As Amanda was led from the courtroom in handcuffs to begin her life sentence, the weight of Judge Chen's words hung in the air. "You will die in prison, Amanda." For a 16-year-old girl, those words represented the end of every dream, every possibility, every hope for a normal life. She would be transferred to an adult women's prison once she turned 18, and there she would remain for the next 60, 70, perhaps 80 years, depending on her lifespan, never again experiencing freedom, never having the chance to be anything other than an inmate.
The case of Amanda Martinez sparked intense debate about juvenile justice, mental illness, and the question of whether any crime, regardless of how heinous, justifies condemning a teenager to die in prison. Legal scholars were divided, with some applauding Judge Chen's decision as appropriate given the calculated nature of Amanda's crime, while others argued it violated the spirit of Supreme Court precedents recognizing fundamental differences between juvenile and adult offenders. Amanda's appeal, filed in January 2021, argued that life without parole for a 15-year-old violated constitutional prohibitions against cruel and unusual punishment, regardless of the crime committed. The appeal emphasized Amanda's mental health issues, her youth, and the scientific evidence about adolescent brain development. However, in March 2022, the California Court of Appeals upheld her sentence, finding that the deliberate, premeditated nature of the murder and Amanda's complete lack of remorse justified the harshest possible punishment. As of 2024, Amanda Martinez remains incarcerated in a California women's prison where she will spend the rest of her natural life. According to prison reports, she continues to be a model inmate who causes no disciplinary problems but also shows minimal emotional growth or development of empathy. She participates in required programs and has earned her high school equivalency degree, but counselors report that she remains emotionally disconnected from the reality of what she did and the life she destroyed. For Roberto and Cristina Martinez, life after Nathan's death and Amanda's conviction has been about learning to survive unbearable loss. They divorced in 2022, unable to navigate their grief together, each reminding the other too much of everything they had lost, not just Nathan, but also the daughter they thought they knew. Cristina has become involved in advocacy for mental health screening in schools, hoping that better identification and treatment of troubled youth might prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. Roberto moved to another state, seeking distance from the memories that haunted him in Riverside.
Nathan's room in the house on Magnolia Avenue remains essentially unchanged, a shrine to a 7-year-old boy who loved dinosaurs and whose life was stolen by the sister he adored. On what would have been Nathan's birthdays, his parents separately visit his grave, bringing toy dinosaurs and leaving them at his headstone. Small offerings to a child who should be growing up, going to school, living his life. The case continues to haunt everyone it touched. Detective Lisa Morrison, who investigated Nathan's death and obtained Amanda's confession, retired early from the police force, finding she could no longer face cases involving child victims without seeing Nathan's small body on that bathroom floor. The jurors who convicted Amanda have spoken publicly about the emotional toll of serving on such a case, of having to view autopsy photos and hear testimony about a child's suffering. And in prison, Amanda Martinez continues her life sentence, knowing she will never leave, never experience the milestones of adulthood beyond the prison walls, never have the chance to be anything other than the girl who drowned her little brother. Whether she will ever develop genuine remorse, whether decades of incarceration and treatment will eventually allow her to understand what she took from Nathan and from her family, remains an open question that may never be answered. The final words of Judge Victoria Chen continued to resonate. "You will die in prison, Amanda." A life sentence for a 15-year-old girl, punishment for a crime so calculated and cold that even her youth could not excuse it. Whether this represents justice or merely revenge, whether society benefits from locking away a troubled teenager forever, whether Amanda Martinez could have been saved with earlier intervention, these questions have no easy answers. What remains certain is that Nathan Martinez, a 7-year-old boy who should be 13 years old now, learning to play guitar and starting high school, is instead forever 7, his life and potential stolen by the person who should have protected him. And his killer, his own sister, will spend the rest of her life paying for that theft, confined to a prison cell, her own potential equally destroyed by the choice she made on that March afternoon in 2020. Some crimes are so unforgivable that age becomes irrelevant. Some betrayals are so profound that no amount of time can heal them. And some sentences, once pronounced, echo forever. You will die in prison.